The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. In the ruins of the ninth spiral, where suns flickered like dying embers and space-time itself trembled from old wounds, there bloomed a garden. Not of flowers, nor of trees, but of machines, ancient, sentient constructs grown from celestial gears and stardust. They spun slowly, endlessly, humming in time with the heartbeat of a dying cosmos. It was in this place, the Clockwork Garden, that Solari was born. She was not meant to exist. The architects, those who forged the laws of gravity and breath, had abandoned the garden eons ago. Yet among the rusting petals of time-bent machines, Solari's spark flared to life. Whether child of forgotten science or stubborn fate, no one could say. She spoke with the orbiting blossoms of iron. She listened to the whispers of quantum wind. The stars, once mute in their despair, began to stir when she passed. By the age of 10, Solari had mapped forgotten wormholes with a stick and the bones of starlight serpents. By 12, she reactivated a fragment of the conductor engine, an artifact said to channel the will of the universe itself. But the universe was broken. Entropy bled through the seams, planets imploded without cause, time unraveled in knots. No architect had returned to mend it, and the other civilizations, scattered across dying galaxies, had surrendered to decay. Solari, alone in the garden, decided otherwise. She would not watch the stars die, she would rewrite the laws of everything. With the garden's help, she crafted a ship grown from moonsteel vines and thruster lilies. Its core beat like a living heart, tuned to Solari's pulse. Her mission was simple and impossible, to find the last architect and convince them to remember what they had made. But what she found at the end of time was no god, no creator, only a mirror. The architect was her. Or rather, a future version, worn and tired, who had once tried and failed. I left the garden, the architect said, because I believed it too late to fix what we broke. Solari stood taller. Then I'll fix it without you. And she did. She returned, seeded galaxies with restored laws, rewound broken time threads, and taught the dying stars to sing again. Her voice became myth, then music, then legend. The universe turned once more, not by fate or design, but by the will of one girl who believed it could. And the Clockwork Garden, eternal and watching, bloomed anew, its flowers now humming with hope. Would you like this turned into a full novel outline or expanded into a chapter-by-chapter structure? Great! Here's Chapter 1 of The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. Chapter 1, The Garden That Remembered. The stars above Solari never twinkled. They pulsed, steady and tired, like old machines trying not to fail. She stood ankle-deep in the violet moss of the garden's edge, her fingertips brushing the curling petals of a brass orchid. It purred beneath her touch, its gears spinning faintly. Behind her, the garden stretched endlessly, pathways lined with metallic vines, glass-blossomed trees, and roots that hummed equations only Solari could hear. She was 13 today, or so the garden told her. You've grown, murmured Elder Thorn, a tall construct of rusted bronze and sapphire eyes. His voice clinked like wind through wind chimes. I fixed your voice coil last week, Solari replied, hands on her hips. Thorn gave a mechanical shrug, still dramatic. She smiled and turned her gaze skyward. One of the binary stars that lit the region was dimmer than before. That made 3 in the last month. She frowned. Another collapse, she whispered. Thorn nodded. Sector 17 Aeon. The core destabilized. Time itself refused to proceed. There are holes now. Places even light refuses. The words settled like lead in her chest. The universe was unraveling faster than the garden could understand. Solari pulled the conductor fragment from her satchel, a triangular shard of living metal that pulsed with strange warmth. She had found it buried beneath the heartroot of the WYRM tree, nestled in the cradle of a broken planet. It had called to her in her dreams. She turned it in her palm. This can fix things, she said aloud, more to herself than Thorn. It has to. If you could stabilize it, Thorn said carefully, you might be able to access the pathways. Solari's eyes lit up. The quantum pathways? The ones the architects used to shape existence? Those very ones. Her heartbeat quickened. Then that's where I'll go. I'll find who left us. Or find out why. She looked to the stars again, not for beauty, but for answers. Thorn hesitated. Solari, those who leave the garden never return. She straightened. Then I'll be the first. In the distance, the great blossom bell began to chime, a low, sonorous sound like the breath of a dying universe. It only rang when something changed. Something had. Solari turned toward the sound. She didn't yet know that today was the day the pathways would open, or that someone, was already watching her through the fractures in time. She only knew this: the garden was not the end. It was where everything would begin again. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2? Absolutely. Here is Chapter 2 of The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. Chapter 2, The Blossom Bell and the Broken Thread. The blossom bell hadn't rung in over 200 cycles. Even the oldest machines in the garden had forgotten its voice. Solari ran toward the sound, her boots crunching over crystal gravel. As she moved, the vines and petals around her shifted, parting like a curtain. Sensing her urgency, the garden was alive, not merely reactive, but aware. At the center of the clearing stood the bell. It was suspended in midair, held not by chains, but by gravitational threads woven into the very fabric of space. Once golden, now tarnished and cracked, it shimmered faintly with starlight residue. Beneath it, a shallow basin filled with memory liquid, silver fluid that reflected not what was, but what had been. As Solari approached, the basin stirred. Images danced on its surface, collapsing stars, flickers of life in far-off systems. A child born beneath the arc sky of the garden, herself, and then, something else. A figure cloaked in shifting timelines, standing where no time should be. She gasped. Did you see that? She asked Thorn, who had caught up behind her. I saw a breach, he said slowly. Something pressed through a fracture. A rift opened above the bell, a thin, jagged crack, like the sky itself was glass breaking from pressure inside. Through it pulsed a strange blue light. The hum in Solari's conductor fragment surged to a scream, and it leapt from her hand into the air, locking into place before the rift like a key meeting its lock. No, Thorn whispered, backing away. Not yet, you're not ready. I have to be, she said, heart pounding. She stepped forward. The rift widened, the bell rang again, bong, and with it, the garden shuddered. A gust of wind burst from the crack, carrying fragments of foreign languages and smells of burning ozone and frost. Solari raised her arms to shield her face as time buckled around her. In the rift, something looked back. It wasn't a creature, not quite. It was a presence, a consciousness woven from entropy and memory. It pulsed with recognition when it saw her. And then it spoke. Daughter of the distant flame, it said in a voice layered across 1,000 tones. You are the variable, the unexpected. Solari's jaw tightened. Who are you? I am the warden of the final collapse, it said. I have watched your birth in forbidden loops. You were not written into the song. You are error. You are hope. Then the rift snapped shut. Solari dropped to her knees, gasping. The conductor fragment drifted down, now warm and glowing, and settled gently in her palm. The garden was silent. Even Thorn said nothing for a long while. Finally, Solari stood. What was that? She asked. Thorn's voice was a hushed chime. That was the universe noticing you. Would you like to keep going with Chapter 3? Absolutely. Here's Chapter 3 of The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. Chapter 3, Blueprints in the Bones of Stars. The universe did not remain quiet after the rift. The garden's roots began to shift, slowly at first, then restlessly, like a dreaming beast disturbed. Great vine spires that had once formed the outermost walls curled inward, forming a protective lattice around the core. Something old had awakened, and the garden was reacting. Solari stood at the center, the conductor fragment pulsing against her chest like a second heartbeat. In her mind, 1,000 thoughts spiraled, but one rose above the rest. There is a way in and a way out. She made her way to the observatory tree. Unlike the other structures in the garden, the observatory wasn't alive. It was a ruin, half collapsed and sunken into the moss. Its telescopic spires pointed at broken angles toward dead constellations. But Solari loved it. She had spent years in its shadows, piecing together what it used to be. Today, she climbed the spiraling skeleton stairs and entered the control hollow. Dust motes drifted in zero-gravity patches, and vines had cracked most of the crystalline interfaces. She knelt beside the old star table, a mapping device built by the architects, able to project spatial memory across timelines. She placed the conductor fragment at its center. The star table came alive. Light burst upward. Holographic stars shimmered into view, more than she had ever seen before. Not just positions, but paths, rivers of probability, arteries of gravity, and dark branches, like veins of poison, spiderwebbing across the cosmos. One path pulsed in deep indigo. Solari leaned in. It was labeled in an architect tongue she barely knew, glyphs translated by instinct rather than study. The anchor of endings, the forge of origins, the singularity root. A location, a machine, a final chance. Thorn's voice crackled through a rusted calm leaf behind her. You've activated the star table? It responded to the fragment. Solari said, it's showing me a place, a structure. I think, not here, far out, beyond mapped reality. Thorn hesitated. Then that's where the singularity thread lies. You know of it? It is the failsafe, he said. The architects built it in the event of total collapse, a final rewrite mechanism, but only one being was ever meant to reach it. Solari's eyes narrowed. The warden? No, the next architect. A hush settled between them. Solari felt the weight of the moment coil around her. She wasn't ready. She was still a child by most standards, but the universe was burning, and she had seen no one else coming. She touched the glowing path on the table. It rippled like water, and from it bloomed a blueprint, not just of the singularity route, but of the vessel needed to reach it. Strange curves, alien energy drives, and a propulsion system woven with memory itself. It was beautiful, and impossible, and hers. Solari whispered, I'll build it. The garden seemed to exhale around her, as if it had been holding its breath for eons, waiting for her to say those words. Thorn's voice was soft. Then you begin the architect's journey. Would you like to continue with Chapter 4? Here is Chapter 4 of The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. Chapter 4, Ship of Memory and Fire. It took 23 rotations of the garden's inner star vines before Solari finished the ship. She built it beneath the hollow canopy, where sky metal bloomed in twisted helixes and quantum sap dripped from bark that remembered futures. The garden gave willingly, offering petals that hardened into hull plating, roots that encoded navigation algorithms, and crystalline pollen that stabilized bot reactive thrusters. Solari named it Eclipsura. Its body shimmered with a surface that reflected not light, but intent. Its engine wasn't fusion or warp, it was driven by a core of entangled memories bound to Solari's own neural patterns. In a sense, she was the ship, and it her. On the day of launch, the garden assembled in silence. Constructs from every quadrant stood watch, rusted engineers with copper hands, blossom machines whose petals unfolded in reverence, and children-shaped drones carved from starlight and sorrow. Even the blossom bell rang once, low and steady. Solari stepped into the ship. The moment she touched the core interface, the cabin bloomed open, a cockpit of living alloy and floating glyphs. Thorn watched from the canopy arch. You'll be leaving the folds of reality, he said, past the edge of mapped time. I know. You'll be alone. She paused. I never really was. The ship responded to her thoughts. The hull shimmered, engines pulsed, and the conductor fragment slotted into the navigation heart. Coordinates aligned, the stars on the viewing canopy rearranged, revealing a map that had never been seen by any living eye. Then, rupture. The Eclipsura tore through the fabric of space like a needle through silk, folding through dimensions where color had no meaning and time moved like breath, forward, backward, sideways. Solari floated in a field of forgotten things, derelict architect stations, broken loops of abandoned timelines, and whispering echoes of civilizations undone. Each called to her, begged for her attention, but she kept flying. Toward the pulse. Toward the singularity route. But the warden had not been idle. As Eclipsura neared the threshold of the final sector, something twisted the fabric ahead, an obstruction not physical, but conceptual. It was a weapon formed from regret, forged in the place where all failures converged. It took shape before her, a mirror. In its surface, she saw versions of herself, older, Bitter, broken, lost. Each one had tried. Each one had failed. Solari gritted her teeth. I'm not them, she whispered. No, the warden's voice echoed. You are worse. You believe you can win. Solari narrowed her eyes. Belief built this ship. It will build the universe again. She thrust her hands into the ship's memory interface. The engine roared with her conviction. The mirror shattered. Ahead, the singularity route bloomed like a flower made of black hole threads and music. She was almost there. Would you like Chapter 5 next? Here is Chapter 5 of The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. Chapter 5, The Singularity Route. The singularity route wasn't a place. It was an idea shaped into matter, a junction where all timelines, abandoned, forgotten, and stillborn, converged like rivers to a delta, suspended in a void beyond color and light. It spiraled upward in fractal branches, each one humming with encoded history, past, future, and possibility sang in its lattice. Eclipsura hovered at its edge, its hull flickering as reality bent. Solari stood in the ship's core chamber, eyes locked on the central interface. The conductor fragment vibrated with a frequency she had never felt before, so fast it blurred, so loud it was silent. She reached out. The ship peeled open, not mechanically, but conceptually. Panels dissolved into meaning, and the route's core opened to her like a heartbeat. Her feet touched nothing, yet she walked forward. Voices flooded her mind, not words, stories. One by one, she lived the endings of dead civilizations, a people who built suns out of glass, a species that sang black holes shut, a sentient virus that loved the stars it destroyed. All of them had reached this place. None had survived it. But none had been her. She reached the route's center, a crystalline node, rotating gently, suspended in infinite void. Within it was a seed, tiny, pale, beating. A Genesis kernel. This was the tool, the final rewrite mechanism, the last key the architects had created before abandoning everything. But as her fingers brushed it, she was flung into vision. She stood at the edge of a universe she hadn't built. Worlds flourished, time moved in harmony. There were no warden echoes, no broken loops, no decaying starlight. And in this world, she did not exist. Solari gasped. Back in the chamber, the warden awaited. You see now, it said, you are an anomaly. For this universe to heal, you must be removed. The garden, the fragment, your entire line of causality, undone. She looked at the Genesis kernel. She could feel it offering her that choice. Press one thought, and everything would reboot, clean, whole, perfect. She stood in silence. Then said, no. The warden froze. You refuse the optimal path? I refuse a perfect world that forgets why it needed fixing. I'll write a new future, one that remembers. She pressed her hand against the kernel. But instead of erasing herself, she merged her memories, her path, her will encoded into the kernel's root logic. Reality screamed. And then began again. In the center of the reborn cosmos, a garden bloomed, not just of machines, but of life, of legacy, of lessons remembered. Above it spun a star unlike any other. And orbiting that star, a child was born. She would one day find an old fragment. And a story written in her own voice. Would you like an epilogue to wrap up the story? Here is the epilogue of The Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, How One Girl Rewrote the Fate of a Broken Universe. Epilogue, the echo of new beginnings. The universe, once fractured and silent, had become a symphony again. Where galaxies had once spiraled into oblivion, they now swirled with light and possibility. Stars grew from the hearts of newborn worlds, and time no longer stuttered, but moved in harmonious waves. The garden, reborn, stretched across the edges of reality like a living organism, its roots not just binding the past to the present, but reaching forward to create the future. Solari's story had not ended, it had only begun again. Years passed, unnoticed by those who still believed the universe was only ever meant to die. But there were those who felt the change, who saw the glimmers of forgotten hope buried deep in the fabric of existence. They called themselves the seekers, adventurers, dreamers, and scholars who journeyed across the renewed realms, seeking knowledge lost in the old collapse. One such seeker, a young girl with eyes like the sun, stood on the threshold of the Clockwork garden, gazing up at the stars. In her hand, she held a shard, a small, triangular piece of living metal, glowing softly with an unspoken warmth. She didn't know it yet, but it was the last piece of a story, waiting to be written again. The garden whispered to her, its petals quivering with recognition. The air hummed with the sound of ancient gears turning. And as the stars watched overhead, a new cycle began. In the silence of the night, the blossom bell rang. Bong. The end. Would you like to explore more about this universe or the characters within it? Perhaps in a new story? Or is there something else you'd like to dive into next? Alright, let's continue the story with the next chapter. Following the rebirth of the universe, we'll focus on the young seeker, who has just discovered the conductor fragment and is about to set off on her own journey. This could be a new chapter in the larger story of the universe, exploring how its changes affect the lives of others. Chapter 1, The Seeker's Awakening. Lyra stood at the edge of the great garden, staring at the sky. The stars, once cold and indifferent, now pulsed with warmth. Each one seemed to whisper secrets of a universe reborn, its memory intact, its heart restored. In her hand, she turned the small shard of metal. It was warm to the touch, as if it had lived, and she could feel the echo of something deep within it. A presence, a purpose. The fragment. She had found it nestled in the ruins of the old observatory tower, half buried under the weight of time and forgotten purpose, and now it was calling her. Behind her, the ruins of her home village stretched out in a half-forgotten panorama. Once, it had been a place of broken stone and decay, abandoned in the wake of the old collapse. But now, with the universe beginning to heal, life was returning. New roots sprouted from the earth, and the old trees that had been bent and cracked in the storms of entropy now stood straight again, reaching upward toward the reborn sky. Lyra, a voice called. She turned to see her father, Joran, coming toward her with a concerned frown. His face was lined with age, but his eyes still held the same fire that had once driven him to explore the farthest reaches of the universe. "You've been standing here for hours," he said, gently taking her arm. "The sun will set soon. You'll catch a cold out here." Lyra smiled softly, though her mind remained focused on the fragment. "I'm not cold," she replied. "I'm waiting." "Waiting for what?" Joran asked, though he already knew. She had always been different. Ever since she was small, she had dreamed of the stars, of things beyond the reach of ordinary life. Lyra held up the fragment, its soft glow illuminating her face. This is what I've been waiting for." Her father looked at the piece of metal, and his expression shifted, becoming a mixture of awe and fear. He'd heard the stories, he knew the legends. The conductor fragment was a relic of the old architects, powerful enough to rewrite the very fabric of reality. "Lyra," he said, his voice trembling, "you don't understand. You can't. This is too dangerous. That thing. I have to go," she interrupted, the certainty in her voice unshakable. "I have to find the garden. I have to understand where it came from, and why it remembers." Her father hesitated, his gaze darting to the horizon where the sky met the ground in a blur of light and shadow. "And if you fail? If you become part of the garden? What then?" Lyra looked at the stars. She had always felt the pull. The garden had whispered to her even before she found the fragment, calling her across the distance. She had always known she wasn't like the others in her village. There was something inside her, something unspoken, that drove her to reach beyond the confines of her world. "I won't fail," she said, her voice firm. "The garden needs me. I need it." Joran sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then I will follow you, even if only to make sure you don't lose yourself." Lyra nodded. "Thank you, father." Together, they walked back to the village, but Lyra's mind was already elsewhere. She felt the pull of the fragment deep inside her, urging her forward. Tomorrow, she would leave. Tomorrow, the garden would reveal its secrets to her. And perhaps, just as it had for Solari, the universe would bloom anew because of her. Would you like to continue with the next chapter of Lyra's journey, or explore another direction in the story? Here is Chapter 2 of Lyra's journey in the Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, The Seeker's Awakening. Chapter 2, The Path of Roots and Stars. The night before she left, the wind howled across the valley, stirring the leaves of the ancient trees that had grown from the soil of a world once broken. Lyra sat outside her small home, the fragment resting in her lap. The glow of its warmth had become a constant companion, flickering like a heartbeat beneath her fingers. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with the distant stars. As though it were more than a relic, it was a living thing. "You're sure about this?" her father had asked again that evening, his voice heavy with a weight only parents seemed to carry. His tired eyes never left her, as though afraid she'd disappear into the night. Lyra had only nodded. The next morning, just before dawn, she took one last look at the village, a patchwork of stone cottages and overgrown paths. The place was healing, slowly, but it was no longer her home. She had outgrown it long ago, her heart always tugging at something distant, something far beyond the horizon. The stars had always called to her, and now the fragment seemed to be the bridge to that distant land. Her father had offered to come with her, but Lyra had refused. This was her journey, and there were things she needed to understand on her own. The garden wasn't just a place. It was part of her, an echo of her soul calling her forward. She could not drag anyone into the unknown with her. The path to the garden was unclear, a trail of half-remembered dreams, whispers on the wind. The fragment knew where it needed to go, and Lyra knew that following its pull was the only way forward. With each step she took toward the mountains in the distance, the world around her seemed to bend, as though time itself was stretching to accommodate her journey. By noon, she had crossed the first ridge and entered the dense forest that led to the garden's hidden entrance. The trees here were older, more ancient than any she had ever seen, their bark carved with symbols that seemed to hum in resonance with the fragment. She had heard the stories about these trees. The Echo Wood, a place where memories grew like leaves, where every tree was a witness to the rise and fall of civilizations. Each root seemed to stretch toward the very heart of the universe. Lyra paused at the foot of a towering tree, its trunk wide and gnarled. The symbols on its surface flickered faintly, almost as if it recognized her. She pressed her hand to the bark, and for a brief moment, the earth beneath her feet seemed to vibrate with knowledge. "It remembers," she thought, her breath catching in her throat. She pulled her hand away reluctantly and continued on her way, the path becoming more difficult as the forest thickened. The fragment's pulse was louder now, more insistent, guiding her through the dense undergrowth and winding trails. Her heart beat in time with it, faster and faster, until she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. As evening fell, the sky overhead became a tapestry of stars, constellations that danced in patterns she had never seen before, shifting and rearranging as though they were alive. Her breath caught. The path had opened before her, a sliver of light amidst the darkened trees. The air shimmered as though space itself was bending. And then, she saw it. At the center of the clearing stood a massive, spiraling structure, ancient yet vibrant with life, its roots sunk deep into the ground, its petals unfurling into the starry sky. It was the garden, the very heart of the universe. But it wasn't just a place, it was alive, a vast, sentient organism, its core pulsing in sync with the stars. Lyra's heart raced, her fingers tingling with anticipation. She could feel the fragment burning hot in her palm, as though it were alive and yearning for something, drawing her closer to the garden's heart. She stepped forward. A sudden voice, low and melodic, echoed in her mind. "The seeker arrives." Lyra froze, her breath caught in her throat. She looked around, but there was no one in sight. The voice, however, seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You seek answers," it continued, "but do you understand the questions?" Lyra's pulse quickened. She didn't know how to answer. How could she? She had never been taught to speak to the garden, to understand its language, but she had felt its presence in her dreams. She had known, deep down, that it was calling her. "I want to know," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to understand the garden, and why it remembers." There was a long silence, and then, a shift. The ground beneath her feet began to hum, a low, resonant tone that seemed to echo through her very bones. The fragment in her hand grew warmer still, and the symbols on the massive trees around her seemed to glow brighter, as if they were activating, coming to life in response to her question. The garden responded. "You are the bridge," the voice said softly, "the one who carries the past and the future in your hands. Come closer, seeker, the truth lies within." Lyra stepped forward, the path ahead of her illuminated by an otherworldly light. She could feel the garden's heartbeat syncing with hers, guiding her toward the center. She had come for answers. But now, she realized, She was ready to become part of the story itself. Would you like to continue exploring Lyra's journey? Or would you like to shift focus to another part of the universe? Here is Chapter 3 of Lyra's journey in the Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, The Seeker's Awakening. Chapter 3, The Heart of the Garden. The air inside the garden was thick with memory. Every step Lyra took seemed to resonate with the ancient hum of its roots, like stepping into the pulse of the universe itself. The path, a glowing thread of golden light, wound through the vast, spiraling lattice of vines and stars. At the center, the very air shimmered with a strange energy, pulling her forward as if the garden itself were alive, aware of her presence. The fragment burned hot in her hand, its glow now a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat. The voice from before, the one that had spoken to her in her mind, now seemed to surround her, echoing in the air with a deeper resonance. You have come far, Seeker. Lyra's heart beat faster. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling despite her determination. We are the echoes of the architects, the voice replied, its tone soft and ancient. We were once the creators of this universe, the dreamers who shaped time and space. We are the memory of what was, and what could be. But you are different. You are a new force, one who can bend the threads of fate. Lyra looked around, trying to place where the voice was coming from, but the garden was vast, endless in its sprawling beauty. Vines intertwined above her, their leaves glowing with soft blue light, casting shadows that seemed to dance. There were no visible beings here, yet she felt the presence of something greater, something watching her from every direction. The time of endings has passed, the voice continued. The world is broken, but not beyond repair. You, Seeker, can rewrite the story. You can reshape the garden's roots, restore the flow of time, and renew the cycles of life. But first, you must understand the cost. Lyra stopped walking, standing still in the middle of the swirling lights and sounds. She was afraid, more afraid than she had ever been. But she knew this was where she was meant to be. She had felt the pull since she was a child, the quiet whispers of something more, something vast, beyond the world she had known. The fragment in her hand grew warmer, and for a moment, she could see visions flickering in its glow, visions of the universe's past. Here is Chapter 4 of Lyra's journey in the Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, The Seeker's Awakening. Chapter 4, The Rebirth of Time. Lyra stepped forward into the heart of the garden. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, everything changed. The air around her shimmered, becoming both solid and fluid at once. Time itself seemed to bend, stretching and folding into a surreal dance, as though the very essence of existence were swirling around her like a storm of memories and possibilities. The fragment in her hand burned bright, casting an ethereal glow that lit the darkness surrounding her. At the center of the garden stood a massive, crystalline structure, its form unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. It was a nexus of energy, made of shifting light and shadow, with tendrils of glowing vines spiraling around it. Reaching toward the stars, the structure hummed softly, as if it were alive, breathing in rhythm with the universe. Lyra's heart quickened as she approached the crystal. The voice that had guided her whispered once more, this time deeper, resonating with an authority that seemed to reverberate through her very soul. This is the heart of the garden. Here, the threads of the universe converge. All that is, and all that ever will be, flows through it. You, Seeker, must now weave the pattern. She raised the fragment, its light blinding for a moment. The crystal at the heart of the garden responded, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. It sent out waves of energy that seemed to resonate with Lyra's own being, as if it recognized her, as if it knew her name. To restore the garden, you must first understand the nature of the rift. It is not merely a tear in space, it is a wound in time itself. The past and future are no longer bound together. They have slipped apart, unraveling everything. Lyra's mind reeled. She had thought of the rift as a wound in the universe's fabric, a place where stars had died and time had fractured. But now, she understood it in a new way. The rift was a wound in the very flow of time, a deep cut that had severed the connections between past and future, creating a world adrift in chaos. The garden's pulse grew stronger, its light brighter. Tendrils of energy reached out, wrapping around her, lifting her toward the center of the crystal. Her body trembled as if she were being pulled in two directions at once, the gravity of the garden's power pulling her toward the heart of time, and the weight of her past pressing her backward, reminding her of everything she had left behind. You must rewrite the flow. The voice continued. But it will cost you more than you can imagine. To heal the universe, you must be willing to let go of all that was. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Lyra clenched the fragment tighter. It felt like she was standing at the edge of an abyss, the weight of what she had to do threatening to crush her. Let go of everything, she whispered to the voice, her voice strained. What if I can't? What if I lose myself? You will not lose yourself, the voice assured her, but you will transform. As the universe heals, so too will you. The garden remembers all, and in time, it will remember you as well, but you must choose. Will you accept the transformation? Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the pull of the garden deep within her. She could feel the connections, the intertwining threads of fate and time, wrapping around her like a cocoon. She could feel the presence of the architects, of the beings who had once shaped the stars, whispering through the veins of the garden. She thought of her family, of her father, of the life she had known, the village that had once been her home, the faces of those she had loved, those she had lost, flashed through her mind. She had never known how fragile the world was until the rift had shattered it. She had never known how fragile she was, until the pull of the garden had come for her. I choose to heal it, Lyra said, her voice steady, though her heart ached. I choose to restore what was lost. In that moment, the crystal before her pulsed with a blinding light, and the world around her seemed to unravel. The garden's heartbeat echoed through her body as the energy from the fragment poured into the crystal. Time bent, the universe shifted. And then, there was nothing. For a brief instant, Lyra felt herself suspended in a space beyond time. There was no past, no future, only the purest form of existence. The garden, the universe, everything was still. She could feel the weight of every choice that had ever been made, every life that had ever lived, every star that had ever burned. It was overwhelming, and then, it was gone. When Lyra opened her eyes again, she was standing at the center of the garden, the crystal before her now a quiet, solid presence. The vines no longer shimmered with an otherworldly light. They had taken on a soft, natural glow, like the light of a distant dawn. The air was still, calm, as though the universe itself had taken a deep breath. The rift had been healed. Lyra's heart raced. She had done it. She had rewritten the flow of time, restored the universe's balance, and yet, the cost was greater than she had anticipated. She could feel it, a part of herself, something deep within her, had been lost in the process. Her memories faded, like distant echoes. The faces of her family, the village, the life she had once known, were slipping away. But the universe was whole again. It had healed. And so, too, had she. Would you like to explore the aftermath of Lyra's transformation, or shift the story's focus to another part of the universe? Here is Chapter 5 of Lyra's journey in the Clockwork Garden of Distant Stars, The Seeker's Awakening. Chapter 5, The Keeper of Memory. Lyra stood in the center of the garden, her breath steady, her body still. The universe had healed, but she was no longer the same. The cost of rewriting the flow of time weighed heavily on her. Her memories, the parts of herself she had once taken for granted, were fading like old dreams, slipping through her fingers no matter how tightly she tried to grasp them. She touched her chest, where her heart seemed to pulse in rhythm with the garden itself. There was a deep ache, a loss she could not fully explain. Faces, names, moments, fragments of her life danced at the edges of her mind but refused to coalesce. The universe had been restored, but she had paid the price. She was no longer the girl who had set out to heal it. She was something else. But the garden still remembered. As she stood there, lost in the quiet of the world she had saved, a soft voice echoed from the roots beneath her feet, a whisper woven through the branches above. You have done what was asked of you, Seeker. You have rewritten the pattern. You have healed what was broken. Lyra turned, her eyes searching the vast expanse of the garden, but there was no one in sight. The voice came from everywhere, resonating within her and around her, as if it were woven into the very fabric of the garden itself. You are the keeper now. The words echoed in her mind, and the weight of them settled over her like a blanket. The keeper, she was the one who had restored the balance, the one who held the memory of the universe within her. But what did it mean to be a keeper when the memories that defined her own existence were slipping away? The garden is not only a place of growth, Seeker, it is a repository of memories, a reflection of all that was, and all that will be. You are now its guardian, The cycles of time will flow through you, and you will watch over the threads of existence. Lyra took a step back, the words swirling around her like a storm. She could feel the weight of the responsibility settling over her. But it was not just a burden, it was a connection to everything that had been.